And now I'm going to share the screen. And now I'm going to
press off the screen.
Play from current slide. Oh, Barbara's here. Okay. Hello, Barbara. Barbara is from our core group, Ramsey's first Ramsey's core group, as is Bob, but also from the core group that started this with the weekly Zoom with COVID. So she's been around a long time. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so off we go here. We've done Cabrillo, and we've covered all his history. Last time we brushed up against Drake, which took us to England for a quick review. For those of you that want more, it's on tape. We certainly talked a lot about the problems that the Spanish after Drake had. I won't go into any detail. This is a quick review. All the details were in last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess. And we certainly went over the problems with the ships getting to the Golden Gate. They never had a chance. If they saw it, we don't know. But we looked at the particulars of why it's so tricky to get into the San Francisco Bay, and we talked a lot about the inverted triangle delta, which is pretty unique. The delta's up here, far away from the opening, and today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Carquinez Strait. Why? Because Martinez sits right here, and this is a crucial place. In the early days, boats can get to Martinez easier than people on foot because of these mountains, and that's why Martinez is the county seat, way up here in the north, away from all the activities in Concord and Walnut Creek. So the access to the Delta is hard. They miss the opening to Golden Gate, and then even once you're in, you've got to go through this narrow funnel. And we're going to talk about the Carquinez Straits in detail. So where we finished in 1603, the Spanish had decided, you know what, California is not that important. We're getting a lot of minerals from South America. All that silver that we want, we can trade, and we'll put it on the Manila galleons, and the galleons are become so big that they don't have to stop for resupply. They just need to come over and catch the California current that runs south off the coast and coast on down to Acapulco. So that takes us to, well, what's going on then with the missions? And this takes us to Kino. He starts out in Sonora with Jesuit missions. And they're very different, as we're going to learn in detail from Franciscan missions. So we spent a lot of time talking about Kino a couple of weeks ago. Just a quick review. You couldn't imagine anybody more different from Junipero Serra. He is a man of the Enlightenment. He's German, Tyrolean, from the Holy Roman Empire, German. And it's interesting. Where he's from, somebody's got echo. Where he's from is in northern Italy, a German part of northern Italy that's in Tyrol. So he's from there. He's a man of the Renaissance. He's a thinker, a scientist, and he recovers from an illness and sees the light and devotes his life to becoming a Jesuit. And he is remembered in his birthplace in the Tyrol in northern Italy. It's very strange to go there. You're in Italy. We went there with Ramsey as we came out of the Dolomites, and they're speaking German, and he is remembered in his birthplace. So there's another lull in California between 1602 and 1683. And they don't go to Alta California in 1683. They go to Baja. They've skipped over Baja. They've stayed on the mainland, and that's where Kino gets his spurs. He builds a lot of missions in Sonora, and he's really, the Jesuits are an independent center of civilization. They're there at the sufferance of the Spanish government, but not of the Spanish government. They're financed by wealthy donors who are seeking ways to heaven. After Drake, though, the Spanish are on the alert for the English, and by 1683, they think it might be prudent to set up some missions over in Baja, closer to the coast. So Kino is one of 200 men sent to La Paz, and they set up. They take their resource from the Jesuit ranchos on the mainland. Kino gets over at Baja, and finally, Bob Oxenberg, this mystery of why people kept thinking Baja was an island. We won't go over that again. But Kino creates the shooting, the smoking gun evidence, and a map. It's not clear to me that the map shows that, but he's the one that's credited with proving once and forever that Baja was a peninsula. So the interesting thing with Kino, I've just selected a few of the things I find fascinating, is his journals show that he explored ancient ruins and ancient trading routes. And I remember when we were on the Navajo reservation, we went to Wapatki, and there was evidence that they traded for seashells at Wapatki. And this is Wapatki in northern Arizona, just 20 miles outside of Flagstaff. I don't know if you remember, they had a ball court here. Think the Olmec rubber balls that they used that were part of all of Mesoamerican civilization. Well, they had a ball court at Wapatki, this far north. But they also had seashells. And you see, Wapatki made the maps of the trade routes. And obviously, there were some trade routes that ran west to east. But you see here, Chaco Canyon, which is much more famous than Wapatki. Keat Seal is also on the Navajo reservation, and I had a chance to go there as well. But obviously most of the traffic was north-south. So all of Mesoamerica was part of one culture. And the most fearsome tribes were always from the north. Just like in Europe, forever there were invaders from the steppes. Well, there was the same in Mexico, and when the Europeans arrived, it was the Aztecs who had come from the north and taken over, and they were a ferocious bunch. Of interest, because Kino was active farther north, technically in Arizona. Arizona has honored him multiple times. So they've got a statue of Kino. The interesting thing was the Native Americans that were there were already agriculturalists. And that was true even further north where we were. The Hopis were agricultural. The Navajos were the herders. And he introduced a European seed, but most importantly, and probably not great for the environment, either micro or macro, he introduced cattle. And we've learned that cattle, where you look at the amount of water that's required to produce a calorie, cattle is off the chart. So it's not a very ecological food source from the macro level, but on the micro level, we know it's not the ideal source either. So a shout out to you vegetarians. So under Kino, love it or hate it, he grew cattle from basic 20 up to 70,000 head. Arizona has chosen to put a statue of Kino in the Emancipation Hall. This is something new in the Capitol since, I think, 2007. It's underneath the Capitol in the basement. And they have chosen to honor Kino there. So Kino arrives. They want to set up missions, but they have to be self-supporting, just like the presidios and the pueblos. So the missions are the third point of the spear, if you will, a trident. The presidios are for security, they're forts. The pueblos are for commerce, they're towns. And so in this area, the mission was in San Francisco, but the town was San Jose, the pueblo. That's where most commerce went on, and it was the second capital of California. We'll talk about the third capital very soon. Kino sets up the third leg of the stool, which is the missions. But they needed workers, and so they got converted and persuaded, or maybe not always in the most friendly way, Native Americans to work in these mission fields. It was always meant to be temporary, but these things never are temporary. And the problem was when you packed a lot of people together close, tooth by jowl, smallpox and measles can really take their toll. When Native Americans are spread out in villages and are exposed to smallpox, it is more a sporadic problem. But once you get them congregated, it becomes a epidemic. So the first mission was Loreto. I think that's very near La Paz. It took him a decade and a half to get that going, but he did, and soon many more follow. Well, who are the indigenous people? We've already talked about the cameo. They welcomed Cabrillo when he landed in San Diego. It wasn't called San Diego then. It took another 60 years for it to be renamed San Diego. But these were the different various Native Americans. Keep an eye on the parakeet. They don't take well to being forced into agricultural communities. And you can see that the Native Americans were separated by gender in dormitories, and there were some forcible conversions, including whippings. And when we get to Serra, well, we'll be discussing some of these same issues. But the parakeet don't take well to that, and they revolt. A couple of missionaries die. Of the 56 Jesuits that go to Baja, 16 die at their post, 2 as martyrs, namely murdered by the parakeet. And to make matters worse, the Jesuits survive all this, but Spain, who has been suffering their presence in the New World, they weren't a part of the official court. Spain finally thinks they're getting too big for their britches, too rich, too powerful, too independent. And for those of us that have seen the movie The Mission, this whole conflict is dramatized quite well. So the Spanish viceroy boots them out, and the governor at that time of Baja is a fellow named Caspar de Portola. And as I recall, I think Homer's family at one point lived in the Portola Valley, but I could be wrong. So Governor Portola oversees the installation of the Franciscans. So now Junipero Serra and the Franciscans are on the map for us. Serra stays 5 years in Baja, kind of supervising the transfer of the mission control from the Jesuits to the Franciscans. And then Governor Portola says, you know what? Let's go back to San Diego. Cabrillo was there quite a while ago. What was that? 230 years, if I'm doing my math right. And let's go back and give San Diego another shot. And remember that we've had some good descriptions of the Bay of Monterey, and so that's pretty good. So let's send an expedition up to San Diego and Monterey. They get to Monterey, and they realize Monterey wasn't all it was cracked up to be. But they know there may be some boats at Point Reyes. So out of kind of desperation, they send a land party to walk up to Point Reyes, which they didn't think would be any problem whatsoever. And they get to Pacifica, and a very tall hill, maybe you could qualify it as a mountain. And they look out to the east and they see this body of water, which is on nobody's maps and is the best kept guarded secret of the Miwoks. forever. They've kept this a secret for 230 years and had another 230 years of undisturbed life in their Eden. There are 400 shell mounds all around this beautiful bay of ours. We've talked about them. We'll probably be talking about them again. And you can get there. It's on 280, a turn off. You park your car and you walk up to Sweeney Ridge, and you can get the same view that Portola got. Now, Portola, it was his scouts actually that were there a few days before he got there to see the wonder of this new body of water. Now they've discovered this backwater that's in the way, and it's backwater is a word I'm going to overuse probably. Finally, in 1772, Juan de Ayala sails in the first ship to pass through the Golden Gate, and you can imagine that must have been quite an adventure. I hope they had tide tables and were studying and were going at even tide. But here, what we've talked about is the camouflage of Angel Island, the hills in the background, but the fearsome tides as they move in and out from this hidden inverted delta way beyond the bay even. And so our destination is Martinez. And so Martinez is over here. And it's got 3 levels of protection, which means literally that this may have been one of the last places in the world touched by European civilization. I give you the year 1842, which is precisely 300 years after Cabrillo goes to San Diego. So it's the Miwoks there are very well protected for another 70 years after the Spanish spot this bay. So they've got the coastal range that's protecting them as well as the bay. So I like to tell the residents, you've finished your residency at the backwater of a backwater of a backwater. But the straits, I'm not dismissing them. The straits are a unique habitat, as we're about ready to see. Martinez is a special place. I know. There's a lot of special places around. Just because I've spent my last 50 years here, I shouldn't be that excited about it. But it takes us back to our whole theme, which has been water in California. We've talked about water in California, the Salton Sea, the Tulare Lake, and we're coming at it at a different angle, and maybe this might be more definitive than the angles we've taken on it before. There was an ancient lake that was called Lake Corcoran, and it was bigger than Tulare Lake. Tulare Lake and Kern Lake are mere remnants of Lake Corcoran, which was the size of Lake Michigan. And it's named after Corcoran clay because the clay is what made the soil impermeable to water. It had a hard time getting down to the aquifer. And we've talked a lot about the aquifer in previous sessions, how it's being deliberately tapped. And Arax, A-R-A-X, wrote a great book on this, The Dreamt Land. And it's the San, all this water comes together at the San Joaquin river. But the San Joaquin River didn't always push its way up and out through the bay. Earlier, before it breaks through the coastal range here, it's a fresh inland lake, and it busted out first at Monterey Bay, and going through following the course of the Salinas River. So for those of you who haven't read East of Eden, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful book. And his opening chapters are imagining the Salinas River Valley in geological time. I didn't know Steinbeck could write like that. And now, he's a Stanford guy, right? We got a few Stanford people on board today. And I noticed, I think Bruce came in late, yet another Stanford guy. I'll introduce you around later, Bruce. We got a new Stanford guy here today. So what's going on at this time, and why does this huge freshwater lake finally break through the Carquinez and create the Carquinez Straits? And of course, it has to do with the warming, the glaciers melting, but also there were, and this is the first time I've read this, changes in the jet stream. I don't know if that's secondary to the changes of the weather on the ground. But the phrase that really caught my eye was when the freshwater lake finally breaks through and creates the Carquinez Straits, that's the outlet to the bay, it was probably catastrophically. And I said, well, wait a minute. I remember a Bible story, the story of Noah. God bless the internet. You learn that the Black Sea deluge hypothesis came to the fore in 1997. I'm going to try to link this to the myth of Noah's Ark. The interesting thing about this, though, is that the Black Sea didn't break through and flow into the Mediterranean, which I assumed would be the case. It was the other way around. The Black Sea had been drained as the drainage shifted to northward, and it was dropping. And because of global warming, the sea levels were rising, and then the Mediterranean raised above the Black Sea and created a strait, just like the strait that was created in Carquinez, from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, filling up the Black Sea. And that was about the same time that the Carquinez Straits were created. The rising Mediterranean creates the Bosphorus, which is very historic for us. And they estimated that it was catastrophic. I guess they have better evidence. It was 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls over 300 days. And that would be memorable. I don't know who was around at the time to remember it, but I'm just curious. Was that really the source of Noah? And here's how much it enlarged the Black Sea. So the original shrunken down Black Sea before the deluge was the darker blue, and then the water broke through and we get the current contours of the Black Sea. So back to the Carquinez Straits. Nobody took my bait that there was no senior Carquinez. The name of the people were the Karkin people, and they were called the Los Carquinez by the Spanish, and they were one of 8 Ohlone dialects. And they resided on both sides of the strait, which is a very strategic place to have your settlement, because you can trade. You got a backland of people to trade with here, and if you've got trusted people on the other side who are trading from their interior, you can have a pretty strong trade. Now, unfortunately, the Karkin were extinct by 1950s, and that unfortunately has to do with their movement to the mission in San Francisco, which is pretty well documented. David Klinick, our resident paleontologist, currently has a job exploring the water flow in Martinez, and he was very interested to see how we were proceeding in our history. And so he sent me this, that Portola's first in command, Captain Fagus, went with Father Crespi, who was Serra's right-hand man, on an expedition in 1772 after they'd reached the Bay Area. And the Crespi, the priest Crespi, crossed the Alhambra Creek. That wasn't named Alhambra Creek at that time. I'll get to the naming in just a second. As they were entering the Diablo Valley around Pacheco, they were on their way, according to their diaries. And Father Crespi said presciently that the water from Alhambra Creek was sweet. Remember that. The water from Alhambra Creek was sweet. This was reenacted after they entered the Diablo Valley. They moved on down to San Ramon Valley. San Ramon has a very active historical society. And so they've even reenacted Crespi and Fagus's exploration around the Bay Area. And in their diaries, they talked about how scared the Native Americans were of them. No surprise. So what is going to be the economy of the area? And there was a California fur rush that started in just a little bit after the first ship sailed into the Bay Area. They maybe even before San Francisco Bay was discovered. The otters were being hunted along the coast, and eventually our little delta back here, and this is a quote, held the largest concentration of beaver in North America. And between 1826 and 1845, and this is when now the Delta is Mexican, no longer Spanish. The Hudson Bay sent parties out annually from Fort Astoria and Fort Vancouver, and they went all the way into the Delta and the San Joaquin Valley as far south as French Camp, which is over by Stockton. Here is a Fort Astoria. Where does that? I'm going to fit that in just a second. So, in the context of the fur trade, we get the sailing into the bay, and just 3 years later, the Pacific Coast fur trade takes off. Not so much by Spanish, who had sailed the coast forever. And Vizcano, you remember the last Spaniard to before the great 80-year lull, had mapped the coast of California. It wasn't through lack of knowledge. It was just that the opportunity cost. They had all they needed to trade from the silver mines in Potosi. There was no need for them to dabble in fur. But the British did, and Captain Cook, who we've talked about in different contexts, the context of the Northwest Passage, which didn't exist, but which will soon, but not then, not exactly now, only in the warmer season. He noted the otter skins. Cook was killed in Hawaii on the Big Island. And that's a hell of a yarn. If you go scuba diving off the Big Island on the Kona side, you'll see a monument to Captain Cook, and it's this statistic may be right. It's the only territory of the United States where sovereignty is given over to another country, and there's a little islet that Britain owns off the just a few yards off the coast at Kona on the Big Island. It's a memorial to Captain Cook, and he was murdered by the local Hawaiians the second time he came back to a village. Are you interested in the first time? I don't know. By gosh, I'm going to take the time and tell you. The first time that Cook sailed into this little cove, it was very providential. They were having a big festival, and they had interpreted Cook's arrival as being a message from heaven, and they treated him like royalty and his men. They got a lot to drink, and they got a lot of access to women. And what they didn't realize was also, while they were hung over, the native Hawaiians who did not know anything about metal were canoeing out to the ship and pulling nails out of the sides of the boats for fish hooks. Cook only discovered that after he left the first time. He gets out to sea, and all of a sudden they've got a big problem, and Cook turns around and goes back. And this is interpreted very differently by the natives at this time. They weren't glad to see Cook come back, and they were hostile. And he wanted his nails back, and they didn't give it to him. One thing led to another, and he was killed in battle. But his men still had these otter skins that started my story, and they went to China and said, by the way, we've got these otter skins, and they were shocked at how much the Chinese were willing to pay for otter skins. And that's the beginning of the great Pacific fur rush. So we're looking at another view of the Carquinez Straits. Below us is to the east is the Sissoon Bay. And then looking west, you see the Carquinez Straits, the bridges. This is Martinez, this is Benicia, and this is the Carquinez Bridge near Crockett. And then this is San Pablo Bay, which is the northern wing of the bay. And some people describing this period of time said it opened up the fur rush, opened up the West to the world of trade. And it wasn't mainly the Spanish, the French and the English and the Russians are here. And then the Americans around 1825. And they harvest prodigious quantities of beaver and river otter and other seagoing mammals. And these seagoing mammals, the density of the hair follicles because of the cold water are quite dense, and therefore the furs are quite efficient in keeping the wearer warm. And the Russians had found that out themselves. They did fur trading in the north of Siberia, and the pelts that they had actually were the source of a lot of their wealth and enabled the Ivans to have the money to go all the way to the Pacific. And they did that in 60 years. So their go west, young men, go west was go east, young men, and they did it much faster and got to the Pacific, Bering Straits. Is a name familiar to us. Now, a big event in Martinez recently, and I say recently, in the last 20 years, has been the appearance of beavers in Alhambra Creek. And everybody was, well, isn't that cute? This is aberrant. No, this is the beavers returning to one of their old haunts before the great fur rush. And they were received with a great hullabaloo in Martinez. They are a keystone species, and that has led to the return to Martinez and to the marina and the waterfront of many different other species following the keystone species, presumably. Birds, steelhead trout, beavers, and otters. And Martinez has rolled out the red carpet. They've fenced off the area where the beaver dam appeared downtown and created murals in honor of the beavers that are quite near the Escobar Street Bridge. And a foundation popped up, called itself Worth a Dam Foundation, and they have sponsored all this beaver mania that you can see in downtown Martinez now. But it's not a cute aberration. It's a return to baseline. Now, remember that the Spaniards who were walking through Martinez on their hike, they called the Alhambra water sweet. And that's interesting. I wasn't sure of this, but I thought there might be some connection between Alhambra bottled water and Alhambra Creek, and there is. So Alhambra water originally came from the source of the creek, which is in Briones Park. And Briones Park, there were also hot sulfur springs, as there are around here. Pepper and I have smelt the sulfur in the air as we have walked along the Ignacio Canal Trail in our neck of the woods. And so from right near the sulfur springs, they laid pipe from the artesian water in Briones Park and pumped it down to right across from the train station to a bottling plant. And they were put on provisionally bottled, but taken by rail for definitive bottling in Oakland and San Francisco. However, today, the Alhambra water is not coming from Briones Park. It has a new source. All right, all this is going on in the background. And in the foreground, remember those cattle that Kino introduced? The Spanish need the cattle. The Spanish, especially in Northern California, especially in Miwok territory, they can't live off the land like the Miwok can. The Miwok have their acorns. They have they're not farming exactly, but they're harvesting. They're having they're burning, having controlled burns, which make the oak trees and healthier, and they're hunting. Deer, and of course, deer are all over the place today. And finally, as I said earlier, in 1842, this rancher, Ignacio Martinez, he had a rancho over in Pinole area, and he expanded. He was doing so well, so he dared figure a way to cross the coastal range to the Alhambra Valley. And early on, the Alhambra Valley was called the Canada de Hambre, which is the arroyo of hunger. And it was named for an undefined incident where Spanish soldiers got stranded and starved in the area because they didn't know how to live off the land like the Miwoks did. And it held that name all the way to the 1842 land grant, when it was deemed Rancho de Arroyo of the Hungry. This is 300 years exactly after Cabrillo that somebody would waste their time writing a document about any place in Martinez. So literacy finally comes. I've said earlier that there were only about 100 people around this time in all of Alta California who could read. So a word about General Vallejo across the straits, and our neighbors in Benicia. He was a Spanish loyalist. He didn't have much tolerance for these Mexican upstarts. And as time went on, he found himself more and more attracted to the Americans, with whom he'd had more in common. He was key in establishing the town of Benicia. He gave Americans the land. He wanted the town to be named after his wife, Francisca, That was not possible. So Benicia was named after someone else in the family. Francisco would have worked, except at the same time, Yerba Buena, which was the original name of San Francisco, had already started the process of changing its name to San Francisco after the sainted Franciscans who had taken over and were a big part of San Francisco. So they moved their name Yerba Buena off to the island, which is right next to Treasure Island, which is the real island next to the man-made island of Treasure Island. The importance of the straits continued. So Benicia became the third state capital, and it still, after multiple renovations, stands, and the inside has been preserved. The state capital was moved from San Jose because San Jose was too muddy. So that was the main reason Benicia got to be capital for a couple of years before Sacramento. And Sacramento was destined because of the gold rush to be the capital. So it's at that time that the first county hospital is built. This gets into my area of interest, and it looks like I've got about 5 more minutes. Because we started a little bit late, I'll just get this story started. So this is the first county infirmary, not really a hospital. And just notice the eucalyptus trees, and next week they'll figure into an interesting narrative story, these eucalyptus trees. It was built in 1880. This picture was taken in 1903. And this is from the kind of this almost the same spot. This is the current county hospital, quite modern, but the eucalyptus trees were at a different angle. The eucalyptus trees still stand, and there was a novel written about San Francisco during World War II where those eucalyptus trees come into play. And this was what the original hospital looked like. It was an infirmary, really, probably people suffering from TB, given the problem of the time. I'll just get started with John Marsh, and this will probably, I'll make John Marsh the end of our story. He arrives in the 1830s. In the area, and I'll tell you how he gets here. I'm going to give you the punchline first. He arrives here and does quite well. He is called a doctor, but he's not a real doctor, and I'll explain that. He didn't live in Martinez, but he was murdered here in Martinez on the way to the ferry. So the ferry, the waterfront, is where all the action is. It's why Martinez is the county seat. And he was on his way to catch the ferry to San Francisco because he had a lot of money. And that's probably why he was murdered. He had a lot of cattle, and he didn't pay his cowhands well, so it's suspected his cowhands murdered him, took his money because they knew he was going to San Francisco to deposit it. And it's on this street that I've had the occasion to be numerous times. This is downtown Martinez. This is the freeway 680. And this is where he was murdered on the way to the Martinez waterfront. This is the house that he built. And how in the hell could he afford to build a house like this, which, by the way, still stands and is been designated a future state park? So here's John Marsh's story, and I'll quit with at the end of this. So Marshall went to Harvard. He wanted to go to medical. He wanted to study medicine, but his dad said, "No, I've given you enough money, you wastrel. You're done." So he apprenticed himself to the Army Medical Corps and was assigned to the Northwest frontier, which at that time was Minnesota. He went to Minnesota, fell in love with a Native American woman, had children. He noted in his diary one of them the children he bore had 6 toes of interest. But because of his affection for Native Americans, he got involved in gun running and supplying Native Americans who he thought were being treated badly, and he was going to help Native Americans fight back. The police, the military police, got wind of it. He knew he was a wanted man, and so he fled, leaving his love and his family, and headed for Mexico, and get out of Dodge, get out of the country. And Mexico was at that time Los Angeles. He set up a practice of practicing medicine in Los Angeles, applying what he had learned from Army doctors, and made tons of money. He cashed out and decided he would go to the Bay Area in the early 1830s and buy some land, buy a rancho, which he did in the eastern part of the county. That this house that he built is out near Brentwood, not far. I'll show you on the map in just a second. He got this huge rancho, and he discovered that it had been sold under duress. What was the duress? The local Native Americans would rustle his cattle, and there was nothing that the previous owner could do about it. Marsh was kind of a hard ass, which probably is why he was murdered, and he went out to confront the Native Americans who lived on the edge of the waterway in a marsh. And he noticed a few of them laying on the ground shaking, and we had malaria in the Delta in those days. So he went back, got some quinine, went back the next day and treated the Native Americans. And the story is that they were so grateful that they stopped rustling his cattle and started rustling other people's cattle for him. So he had a lot of cattle when the gold was discovered, and he lived on the Delta, and it was just a matter of marching his cattle over and putting them on flatboats and floating them up to Sacramento. And the money that he got built this house, this fabulous house. And And one night he's enjoying his new house, and there's a knock on the door. And he opens the door, and there's a young man standing there, and he says, "I am your long lost son." And Marsh is immediately suspicious. So what does he ask his son to do? I'll give you just 5 seconds to think to yourself what he might ask his son to do, and then I'll take a couple of seconds to ask if anybody wants to guess. He asked them to
Take off his shoe.
take off his
Take off your
shoes.
Count your toes.
There you go. Take off your shoes. And the fellow had 6 toes, and so Marsh embraced him. But alas, it wasn't too much longer that he took his money and got on his horse to deposit it in San Francisco, and was murdered. So this is the future Marsh Creek State Historic Park, and how you get there from Antioch. It's not far, and this takes us up to another Dr. Strenzel, and this is a really fascinating story. The teaser here is he fled Poland. He's a Pole. He fled Poland in 1830. Anybody want to guess why? The Russians invaded Poland in 1830 and suppressed the Poles. So that's where we'll start next week. Any comments, questions, additions?
Great job. Yeah, good stories.
Yeah, good story, John.
Yeah. Thanks,
Okay.
John.
Okay,
Thanks, John.
Bob's got a comment.
Well, maybe the answer is obvious. You talked about that valley of the La Cañada del Hambre. Is that how the valley came to be called Alhambra, or is that nothing to do with that? It's named after the wonderful palace of Granada.
No, well, yeah. Here's the story. So it had that name, and I'll just tell you that the wife of John Strenzel, she's a very interesting woman, but their daughter is even more interesting. And their daughter marries a guy. Their son-in-law is going to be famous. Okay, so that gives you a hint of where we're going with this. But Strenzel's wife hates the name, hates it, and it's no longer the Valley of the Hungry, because John Strenzel, when he left Warsaw, headed for Hungary, got a medical degree, but also learned horticulture. And when he came to the valley, in addition to practicing medicine, he started fruit groves. And he had the green thumb, and he turned Alhambra Valley into a very strong producer of fruits. He grafted, did a lot of grafting, and created hybrids that all did well. I'm not going to hold out anymore. His son-in-law, who he got to agree to work for him for 10 years and help him harvest the fruit and graft and create new breeds, was John Muir.
Oh, wow.
So,
In the bar.
yeah, Shigeko.
We have Alhambra here in
Botanist and
Southern California.
University.
Is there a relationship to your Alhambra?
Yes, yes. The brand name, the first Alhambra was from that creek, and next week you'll see where that creek starts. It starts way up in Briones Park, where I think Bill Walker has exercised in the past.
Mountain biking.
From Tavern Estates, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's the original Alhambra, Shigeko. And the next time you visit, we'll go John Muir House, and we'll go to the source of the Alhambra water in Briones Park. Harold.
I lived in Alhambra, California, and that's named for the Alhambra in Spain. But
Yeah.
they also had really good water there because they had their own wells.
Well, there you go. Maybe there's two Alhambras. I don't.
Yeah, there's Alhambra in Southern California. It's wedged between Monterey Park and Pasadena.
Yeah, I think I've been there. Yeah.
So
Harold, okay. Harold, you can take your hand down. Homer.
Yeah.
did Alhambra have anything to do with I'm blocking on his name, the botanist in Santa Rosa,
Luther Burbank.
Research.
Yeah, Burbank.
and Luther Burbank. Yeah, they might have been contemporaries, no?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll Google that. I'll report next week. Will you be out of the hospital next week?
I sure hope so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're pulling for you. Aiko.
My girlfriend and I went to the John Muir house just as all those fruit trees were bearing fruit, and you're allowed to pick a few. Unfortunately, they were huge, and we wanted to be greedy, but we only took 2 or 3.
Well, that's John Strenzel, and that's John Muir. And you'll hear more about them next week. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, question for you on the marsh park that you talked about, Marsh Creek. Does Morgan Territory Road come into Marsh Creek?
Yeah, Morgan Territory's on the backside of Mount Diablo, so it's pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because some of that stuff, that the Native American things, there's tremendous amount of mortars that have been documented there, and so they do know that those were some sites that huge villages of Native Americans.
Yeah, there was a very interesting finding there, a graveyard that some of the graves had a couple of bodies, but then an additional head. I hope I'm remembering this right. And nobody could figure out what it was, but they landed on the most benign interpretation, which was a husband and a wife and a person from another tribe. So I forget exactly the logic of it. I'll have to review that. But that was a big. There have been some really important digs over there. We'll ask our resident archaeologist about it, paleontologist.
Cool. Well then, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. See you next week. And
just to be sure, just remember, there's always next year. So for you guys that you think you have a Cal roots, we'll get you next time.
So, I was just over there. I took my buddy from the third grade, and his wife. They were here. We were remembering a fallen comrade, and we went to the top of the Campanile. I went up there for the first time.
Well, did you jump?
I didn't. And I didn't unfurl any banners either.
No banners up there either. Huh?
I don't know why I didn't. Okay, folks, see y'all next week.
Bye.
Stay on, Homer.
I'm staying on. You're gonna hear my IV beeping.